Did you know that the life of Pontius Pilate, the man who authorized the crucifixion of Jesus, ended in a mysterious and tragic way? Imagine being responsible for one of the most controversial decisions in history and then suffering the consequences in silence. Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, is a figure mentioned in many historical and religious sources. But what exactly happened to him after that fateful day? This story weaves together biblical accounts, historical documents, and various narratives to uncover more about Pilate, a man who is mentioned in all four Gospels of the New Testament. His hesitation and eventual decision to crucify Jesus are well documented, along with his interactions with Jesus and the pressure he faced from Jewish authorities, as described in Matthew 27, Mark 15, Luke 23, and John 18:19. Additionally, historians such as Flavius Josephus and the Roman philosopher Philo of Alexandria provide further context on Pilate's rule in Judea. These combined sources help to create a broader understanding of Pilate, a complex figure whose role in the crucifixion has been examined for centuries. To fully understand his story, it's crucial to explore not only the biblical events, but also the complex political and social dynamics of his time. So, stay with us as we dive into the incredible and unsettling story of the Roman governor who sealed Jesus' fate. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, found himself in a dilemma. The Jewish religious leaders were demanding the crucifixion of Jesus, accusing him of blasphemy. But Pilate, after questioning Jesus, could find no legitimate crime to justify such a punishment. In fact, John 18:38 records Pilate saying, "I find no basis for a charge against him." He attempted multiple times to release Jesus, even suggesting the annual practice of releasing a prisoner during Passover as a way to free him. But the crowd chose Barabbas, a criminal, over Jesus, as detailed in Matthew 27:15-26. Despite his personal reluctance, Pilate eventually gave in to the crowd's demands. He tried to symbolically distance himself from the decision by washing his hands in front of the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood," according to Matthew 27:24. This gesture, however, would not absolve him in the eyes of history. It has since become a symbol of cowardice and injustice. In addition to the biblical narrative, Pilate also tried other methods to appease the crowd. According to Luke 23:16, he ordered Jesus to be scourged, hoping that this lesser punishment might satisfy the Jewish leaders. But it wasn't enough to calm the growing unrest. This decision, one that would define Pilate's legacy, set the course for both the crucifixion of Jesus and the ultimate downfall of Pilate. His actions and the consequences that followed would be debated and scrutinized for centuries to come. At the time, Jerusalem was a city on edge, especially during the Passover celebration. The religious leaders accused Jesus of inciting rebellion against Rome, a serious charge under Roman law, Luke 23:2. Pilate understood that condemning Jesus to death would prevent further unrest, but he also knew that Jesus was innocent of any crime deserving such a fate. This internal conflict placed Pilate in a very difficult position. If he released Jesus, he risked a Jewish rebellion. If he condemned him, he would be executing a man he knew to be innocent. Ultimately, Pilate made the decision to condemn Jesus to avoid an uprising. Little did he know, this decision would haunt him for the rest of his life. The Bible doesn't provide a detailed look into Pilate's inner thoughts, but his actions suggest a man under immense pressure, trying to balance justice with maintaining public order. History tells us that Roman governors like Pilate were responsible for keeping the peace in their provinces. In a place as politically unstable as Judea, maintaining order required careful decisions. Any sign of weakness could invite rebellion or draw the attention of Rome's enemies. Pilate's situation was extraordinarily complex. Every choice he made had the potential to lead to serious political and social consequences. Adding to this complexity, while Pilate was in the middle of deciding Jesus' fate, his wife, Claudia Procula, had a disturbing dream. According to Matthew 27:19, she sent a message to Pilate, warning him to have nothing to do with that righteous man. Her dream is only mentioned in the Gospel of Matthew, and its significance remains a mystery. Some interpreters believe it was divine intervention, an attempt to prevent the crucifixion of Jesus. Claudia Procula is a figure who appears only briefly in the biblical accounts, but her intervention highlights Pilate's inner turmoil. Her warning, based on a dream that deeply troubled her, added to Pilate's moral struggle. Ignoring this warning, many believe, was one of the greatest mistakes of Pilate's life, one that would haunt him forever. Later Christian traditions even went so far as to sanctify Claudia, emphasizing her importance in the Passion drama. In these traditions, she becomes a symbol of conscience, a voice trying to prevent an unjust act. Her disturbing dream adds a supernatural element to the narrative, suggesting that greater forces were at play during Jesus' trial. Under Pilate's orders, Jesus was crucified. The inscription on the cross read, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." John 19:19. This inscription, written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek, was Pilate's way of affirming the charge against Jesus, that he claimed to be a king, an act of treason against Caesar. Even while Jesus hung on the cross suffering, Pilate likely wrestled with his own doubts and guilt over the decision he had made. The crucifixion of Jesus is a central event in all four Gospels and is described in vivid detail, including the reactions of various onlookers and the supernatural phenomena that accompanied it. For instance, Matthew 27, verse 45-51, describes the sky turning dark at noon and the temple veil being torn in two. These events only intensified the weight on Pilate's conscience. As he witnessed these extraordinary occurrences, he may have started to question whether he had made a grave mistake. The Bible portrays the crucifixion as more than just a human event. It was a cosmic battle between good and evil. Crucifixion was a brutal method of execution, reserved for the most heinous criminals. It was meant to be a public spectacle, a form of punishment designed to both shame and kill. Pilate's decision to proceed with this form of execution, even though he didn't believe Jesus was guilty, reveals the immense pressure he was under. It also shows the complexity of the political and social situation in which he found himself. After the crucifixion, Pilate's life took a darker turn. His decision to condemn Jesus tormented him. He had been manipulated by the crowd and religious leaders, and the weight of this decision pressed heavily on him. Jesus' words from the cross echoed in Pilate's mind, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Luke 23:34. As the days passed, Pilate's guilt became unbearable. While the Bible doesn't go into detail of Pilate's internal struggles after Jesus' death, it's reasonable to speculate that the psychological impact of his actions would have been severe. Christian tradition suggests that Pilate was never able to overcome the guilt he felt for his role in Jesus' death. Various apocryphal Gospels and extra-biblical sources, like the traditions of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, provide more insight into Pilate's torment. These sources paint a picture of a man consumed by guilt, whose attempt to wash his hands of responsibility did nothing to alleviate the burden on his conscience. In fact, according to some traditions, Pilate eventually converted to Christianity, seeking redemption for his role in the crucifixion. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, for example, holds this belief. However, this idea is speculative and not universally accepted. The turmoil in Pilate's life didn't end with the crucifixion. The guards at Jesus' tomb reported that Jesus had risen from the dead. Matthew 28:4-15. This caused a stir among the Jewish leaders, and Pilate tried to cover it up by bribing the guards to spread a lie, that Jesus' disciples had stolen the body. Matthew 28:12-15. Despite these efforts, the news of Jesus' resurrection spread quickly, and it only deepened Pilate's torment. For Pilate, the resurrection was a crisis. If Jesus had truly risen from the dead, it meant that Jesus' claims of divinity were true, and that Pilate had condemned an innocent man to death. His attempts to cover up the resurrection reflect his desperate struggle to maintain control over the situation, as well as his growing personal anguish. The resurrection wasn't just a religious issue for Pilate, it was a political one, as it threatened to undermine his authority and destabilize the fragile order he had worked to maintain. The resurrection is central to the Christian faith, as emphasized in the Gospels and the epistles of the New Testament, 1 Corinthians 15:3-8. For Pilate, however, it marked the beginning of a personal unraveling. His role in Jesus' death haunted him, and as the Christian faith spread, the significance of his decision became even more pronounced. In the decades following the resurrection, Christianity grew rapidly. Jews and Gentiles alike began converting to the new faith, and as the message of Jesus' resurrection spread, Pilate's role in Jesus' death became even more significant. Pilate, a once powerful Roman governor, now found himself entangled in a growing conflict between the temporal power of Rome and the emerging spiritual power of Christianity. As Christianity expanded, the resurrection became a pivotal point in the faith's doctrine, and Pilate's decision to crucify Jesus took on even greater importance. The tension between Roman authority and the spiritual movement of Christianity only grew more intense, and Pilate's personal conflict reflected this larger struggle between the old and new ways of thinking. Back in Rome, Emperor Tiberius received conflicting reports about what had happened in Judea. Pilate was already in a precarious position, facing accusations of mismanagement. He was deeply unpopular among the Jewish people due to his harsh methods and disregard for their customs. Both the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus and Philo of Alexandria described Pilate as a ruthless governor who frequently provoked Jewish anger. One particularly controversial decision was when Pilate used temple funds to build an aqueduct, an act that sparked outrage among the Jews. Things only got worse for Pilate when he was recalled to Rome. He had been removed from office following an incident involving the massacre of Samaritans on Mount Gerizim. This, along with his poor administration of Judea, led to his recall by Lucius Vitellius, the governor of Syria. In Rome, Pilate faced a thorough investigation into his conduct, and his political career came to an abrupt end. The consequences of Pilate's actions in Judea extended beyond his own downfall. They had a significant impact on the province itself. His brutal tactics and disregard for Jewish traditions had destabilized the region. Pilate's removal from power and subsequent investigation highlight the challenges Roman officials faced in governing distant provinces like Judea, where local customs and aspirations for independence often clashed with the imposition of Roman authority. Once in Rome, Pilate's problems continued to escalate. Tiberius was furious over the tensions Pilate had caused in Judea. Pilate's political enemies seized this opportunity to launch attacks against him. He was deposed, stripped of his rank, and exiled. His wife, Claudia, continued to suffer from terrible nightmares, and Pilate, consumed by guilt and shame, withdrew from public life, living the rest of his days in isolation. Tradition holds that Pilate didn't face a formal trial, but was instead forced into retirement. Various apocryphal accounts, such as the Acts of Pilate, offer different versions of what happened to him after the crucifixion. Most of these stories describe a man full of remorse, who spent his final years in penance, trying to atone for his role in the crucifixion. Pilate's death remains shrouded in mystery and speculation. Some accounts suggest that he committed suicide, unable to bear the weight of his actions and the humiliation of his exile. Eusebius of Caesarea, a 4th-century church historian, writes that Pilate took his own life during the reign of Emperor Caligula. Other historians, like Tacitus, don't provide specific details about Pilate's death, leaving the circumstances unclear. Christian tradition offers several different versions of Pilate's final days. Some stories claim that he converted to Christianity, seeking forgiveness for his role in Jesus' death. One popular legend, which gained traction during the medieval and Renaissance periods, tells that Pilate killed himself in exile in Gaul and that his body was thrown into a river. Regardless of the specific details, Pilate's death is often seen as a tragic end for a man who played such a critical role in one of the most significant events in history. The combination of history, tradition, and speculation surrounding Pilate's death reflects the complexity of his legacy. Over the centuries, Pilate's story has been used to explore themes of guilt, redemption, and justice. If his suicide is true, it represents the ultimate expression of despair and remorse. On the other hand, the stories of his conversion suggest a man seeking absolution for his sins. These differing interpretations highlight how difficult it can be to separate fact from fiction when dealing with figures involved in events of such profound religious and moral importance. In Christian history, Pilate's legacy has often been painted in a negative light. He is frequently portrayed as weak and easily manipulated, a man who lacked the courage to stand up for what he knew was right. His life and death serve as a powerful reminder of the consequences of yielding to pressure and failing to act with integrity. In the Gospels, Pilate is depicted as a governor who, despite recognizing Jesus' innocence, gave in to the demands of the crowd. Over the centuries, Christian tradition has vilified him for this act of cowardice, although some apocryphal texts offer a more sympathetic view of his character. Nevertheless, Pilate's hesitation and final decision have been the subject of numerous theological debates, with many focusing on the moral and ethical complexity of his role in the crucifixion. This so-called black legend of Pilate serves as a warning about the dangers of being swayed by external pressures at the expense of justice and truth. He is often compared to other historical figures who faced similar moral dilemmas, and his story is used to illustrate the importance of standing up for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. During Holy Week in many Christian traditions, Pilate is remembered as a figure who embodies the consequences of cowardice and injustice. His tragic story provides a wealth of theological reflection. Pilate stood before the Son of God, yet failed to recognize the truth. His inability to act justly is often viewed as an example of human weakness. Pilate's story challenges believers to consider their own decisions and the courage required to follow the truth, even when it's difficult. Over the centuries, theologians have frequently debated Pilate's role in the Passion of Christ, using him as an example of the tension between justice and convenience. His symbolic act of washing his hands is often seen as a way to ease his guilty conscience without truly taking responsibility for his actions. In Christian teachings, Pilate's story serves as a reminder of the need for moral courage and integrity. His failure to act justly in the face of overwhelming pressure reminds us that when we're faced with difficult decisions, we must choose the path of righteousness, even if it comes with personal consequences. Christian theology often views Pilate as a symbol of the ongoing struggle between good and evil, with his failure to recognize the truth of Jesus serving as a warning against moral complacency. Additionally, Pilate's story encourages self-reflection. It calls us to examine our own hearts and to strive to live by principles of justice and truth, no matter how challenging the circumstances. Pilate's internal struggle and his role in the crucifixion have also been explored by countless artists and writers over the centuries. From medieval religious art to modern literature, Pilate has been depicted in various ways, reflecting the changing perceptions of his character. Works like The Gospel According to Jesus Christ by José Saramago and The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov portray Pilate as a deeply conflicted man, torn between his duty and his moral convictions. In art, Pilate is often depicted during the scene of Jesus' condemnation with expressions of doubt or resignation. These cultural representations show how Pilate's story has left a lasting impact on the collective imagination. Pilate also appears in many Easter productions around the world, where his role is often reinterpreted to fit modern contexts. The many interpretations of Pilate in popular culture reflect the evolving values of each generation. As times change, so do the ways we understand and evaluate Pilate's actions. His story continues to resonate because it touches on universal themes of power, morality, and the consequences of human actions. Pontius Pilate's memory lives on in Christian tradition and in the collective consciousness. His story serves as a testament to both human power and human fragility. He is remembered not just for what he did, but for what he failed to do, the courage to stand up for truth and justice. Pilate's inclusion in the Apostles' Creed and in the narratives of the Passion ensures that his figure remains central in Christian memory. His story is used in both religious and educational contexts to teach lessons about morality and responsibility. Pilate's legacy serves as a reminder of the challenges faced by those in positions of power and the importance of making just decisions, even when under pressure. In many traditions, Pilate is seen as a symbol of how fear and cowardice can lead to morally wrong choices. In addition, Pilate's story often leads to reflections on the nature of judgment and human fallibility. His decisions and the condemnation of Jesus are discussed not just as historical events, but as ethical case studies. Pilate's memory serves as a warning to all of us about the importance of acting with integrity and courage, reminding us that our actions can have lasting consequences. The story of Pontius Pilate continues to have a lasting impact on Christian faith. It challenges believers to reflect on their role in society and the responsibilities they carry in making decisions. Pilate is a tragic figure whose life and death continue to inspire and warn. Christian theology uses Pilate's figure to discuss themes of sin, redemption, and justice. His role in Jesus' death is central to understanding Christ's sacrifice and the concept of salvation. Pilate's story teaches us important lessons about the power of responsibility. His life is also frequently used in educational settings to teach about the importance of moral courage. Pilate's story reminds us that power can corrupt, and that a lack of moral strength can lead to disastrous consequences. Pontius Pilate's legacy is profound. His story serves as a constant reminder of the importance of seeking truth and justice in all circumstances. It teaches us about redemption and the power of forgiveness. Pilate, the man who authorized the crucifixion of Jesus, is a complex and tragic figure. Reflecting on his life and death reminds us of the importance of making just decisions, no matter how difficult. Pilate's tragedy is an eternal reminder that our actions have consequences, and that the pursuit of justice and truth must always be our highest priority. His story encourages us to confront our own moral and ethical dilemmas with integrity and courage. Pilate's life challenges us to consider our responsibilities and the impact of our decisions on the present and the future. It teaches us that seeking the truth, no matter how difficult or unpopular, is always the right path. Pilate is a figure who continues to resonate in our collective conscience, reminding us that justice and truth must always come first. In the end, when we reflect on Pilate's life and his tragic death, we are reminded to examine our own actions and to always act with justice and integrity, regardless of the pressures we may face.